Greetings, dear learners. Welcome to this video on reading comprehension. There are two parts to this lesson. In part 1, we will consider a few reading strategies and tackle explicit questions. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to demonstrate deeper understanding of a text, differentiate between literal and implicit meanings in the text, deduce meaning of words in the context of the text, and identify the writer's craft. Before beginning to read the passage, you can have a quick look at the questions. This will allow you to have a broad idea on the information you need to be attentive to. This can also help you locate the answers to a few questions in the text as you start reading. Then, proceed with your first reading of the text. Skim through the text. Skimming means you read rapidly to get a general idea of the storyline, situation, theme, and/or characters. After your first reading, you can look at the questions again. Now, you can move on with your second reading, which is detailed reading. This means that you have to read with great care and attention to gather specific information or evidence. During this second reading, you are advised to analyze words for a deeper understanding of the text. Here, you can jot down notes, synonyms, and underline or single out important material. Once you have read the comprehension carefully, you will have to answer both explicit and implicit questions. Explicit refers to questions requiring you to: Number 1, identify literal meanings. Number 2, quoting directly from the passage. Number 3, explain the meaning of words, phrases, and expressions, and write answers in your own words. Implicit questions refer to inferential questions based on the writer's craft. In other words, these are questions on meaning and effect. Let us now have a look at a comprehension entitled Nameless. Mo and Marwood have finally found Nameless. They had been looking for this large redwood tree that no one had ever attempted to climb before. Redwood trees can live for more than 2,000 years and are the world's tallest living trees. Mo and Marwood stood at the base of Nameless, peering upwards into its crown. The structure of any redwood tree is the opposite of most trees, whose branches get smaller towards the top. Nameless, this ancient giant of the forest, grew increasingly complicated and more massive higher off the ground. The tree was about 100 meters tall, with a diameter of about 3 meters near its base. The trunk was an enormous cylinder of soft, crumbly bark. Far above the ground, a few small, wispy branches popped out of the trunk, but there were no branches on its lower reaches. Higher up still, a tangle of limbs emerged and wandered out of sight, buried in clouds of foliage. Mo and Marwood couldn't see its top. Marwood recalled that in ideal conditions, a redwood can grow from a seed into a tree that's an astonishing 60 meters tall in just its first 20 years of life, increasing in height by nearly a meter annually. After that, it grows faster still, adding mass at an accelerating rate. It can exceed 75 centimeters in diameter at chest height in fewer than 60 years. The growth of redwoods generally slows down after the first 100 years, though by the age of 800 they may have reached a height as tall as a 30-story building. Redwoods are shade tolerant. They can survive in dark places at the bottom of a forest, in the deep shade of their elders, where few other trees would survive. A small redwood living in deep shade hardly grows at all, but doesn't die. It goes into a kind of suspended animation. If it is hit by light, it once again grows with relentless speed. Nameless had clearly basked in light. It was huge. "You aren't going to climb it, are you?" asked Marwood incredulously. No answer. Mo looked again at the lowest branch of a smaller tree standing next to Nameless. Without warning, he leapt, grabbed, and swung himself up onto the branch in one fluid movement and began climbing upwards. "I really don't think that's very smart," Marwood warned from below. 10 minutes later, Mo arrived at the top of the smaller tree. The tree had narrowed to a pole thinner than his wrist and began swaying under his weight. Having got as high as he could go, Mo looked across at Nameless and spotted a spray of slender branches on the curving wall of its monstrous trunk. A little branch stuck out directly in front of him. Mo wanted to grab that branch. He edged closer to it, and the smaller tree began to bend under his weight. There was a gap between the branch of the smaller tree and Nameless. From the ground, Mo hadn't noticed that gap, expecting that the little tree's branches touched the big tree's branches, providing a bridge to walk across. Mo studied the situation. If he could just reach out far enough, he might be able to grab that little branch on Nameless. Trying not to think about how high up he was, Mo focused his mind on the problem. The gap was really not very large, he thought. He would have to let go of the small redwood and make a leap up into the big tree and grasp a branch with his hands, like a circus performer catching the bar of a swinging trapeze. He had to jump high, or his body wouldn't clear the branches of the smaller tree, and he'd get tangled and would fall. was standing on the ground and I had to make this jump. I could do it, he thought. So why not up here? He tried to force his hand to just let go of the tree. Just let go. I can't watch, Marwood shouted furiously from below and closed his eyes. He dreaded hearing a scream followed by a meaty thud. In the top of the tree, Mo let go and jumped. He felt gravity go to zero. The world stopped. Mo watched the branch of the large redwood approach in slow motion and saw his fingers extend towards it. There was a jerk, and he found himself hanging from the branch by both hands, bouncing with his feet kicking the air. Swinging hand over hand, he got himself over to the trunk and climbed the next 3 precarious meters onto a stronger branch. He had arrived somewhere in the lower tiers of Nameless, just below the crown of the huge tree. The branches here were bigger and closer together. There was foliage everywhere, above, below, and on all sides, layer upon layer of leaves like tents within tents. The tree hadn't looked so big from the ground. Climbing upwards, slowly and steadily through the labyrinth, Mo lost sight of the ground. It felt as if he was passing through a membrane and entering another world. His senses were overwhelmed by an impression of life all around. Flaky, grey-green and brownish parts in all manner of shapes hung from branches, drippy, fizzy, stringy and hairy. He began picking pieces off, tucking them into his pocket. As he neared the upper surface of the redwood canopy, the lacework of branches glowed with varied shades of green, and he broke out into the sunlight. An hour after he'd jumped into it, Mo arrived at the top of Nameless. "It's doable!" he shouted down. Dear learners, I hope that you have enjoyed the text. We'll now have a look at a few questions based on this comprehension. We'll consider the literal questions first. The answer to the literal question is direct and clear to identify. You have to look at the keywords in the question which will direct you to the answer. Here's an example from the passage. Redwood trees can live for more than 2,000 years and are the world's tallest living trees. The question based on this sentence is, what are the characteristic features of redwood trees? The answer is straightforward, and it is their lifespan can exceed 2,000 years and their height surpasses any other living tree. The second type of explicit question is quoting from the passage. Whenever you are asked to quote, give proof, state evidence, or prove, it means that you should copy either words, expressions, or phrases from the text. Your answers should be written between double inverted commas since you are lifting from the text. You should closely consider the key words in the questions. For instance, if you have to pick a single word, it means just that. The answer is a one-word answer. Similarly, you might be asked to find two consecutive words or to identify a phrase. This means that it's not a sentence that you're supposed to copy, but either two consecutive words or a phrase. We'll now have a look at a question requiring such an action. The question is as follows. Quote, two consecutive words which show that the tree was very old and extremely big. The answer here is ancient giant. Next, we need to tackle the vocabulary questions. You will be asked to explain the meaning of words, expressions, and or phrases from the passage. Words should always be explained according to the context. And we're going to have a look at an example. The question is, explain what the text means by more massive, higher off the ground. The answer is, the volume of leaves and branches becomes more important at the top of the tree. You might also have multiple choice questions which are explicit in nature. You need to look at all the options provided attentively and proceed by elimination. This will help you when you have more than one answer that might seem acceptable. However, there will always be only one correct answer. Be mindful of the distractors. We'll be considering two multiple choice questions based on the extract appearing on your screen. The instructions for the multiple choice questions are: circle the letter A, B, C, or D which has the same meaning that the word or phrase has in the passage. In the first multiple choice question, we have to explain the word wispy. And the correct answer is C, thin. The second question requires us to explain the phrase buried in clouds of foliage. And the correct answer is B, which is hidden behind layers of leaves. A few questions require answering in your own words. Here, you can follow two easy steps. Firstly, write down the literal meaning of the words. And secondly, even if you cannot find synonyms, you can use phrases to explain or describe the meaning of words. Remember that you are not expected to explain any technical terms. However, you should abstain from lifting whole sentences or parts of sentences from the comprehension. If you cannot find alternative words, you can always remodel, that is, rearrange the words in a different order. Here's another question. Using your own words, explain what is meant by the trunk was an enormous cylinder. The answer is the shape of the trunk was huge and it looked like a drum. Dear learners, we've reached the end of this video on Reading Comprehension Part 1. I recommend you watch Part 2, in which we will tackle implicit questions.